Hello friends, welcome to Universe of Naruto X. If you love Naruto what if stories and anime explanations, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin today's story. I ran in the trees, weapons at the ready. Kerr and I was walking next to the client's wagon. I was to be the first line of defense. Kerr and I being ready to defend should it be needed. I was following a few civilian-level chakra signatures on the forest floor. Eyeing their clumsy navigation through the forest, I calculated my next moves. I jumped off of the tree branch that I was on, dropping down on top of the bandits. I drew a pair of shuriken in a puff of smoke and threw them. They both hit their marks on two of the bandits' necks. I had attached ninja wire to the shuriken. With a pull, the shards of metal came loose and were flung through the air, both piercing the necks of two more bandits. This mission was my trial run for the wire, and it was proving to be rather useful. I think I'll keep it in my arsenal. With four of them dead, there was only one bandit left alive. He was backing away from me. His weapon, a repurposed farming tool, was shakily pointed at me. I activated my Sharingan and stared into his eyes. Tell me everything. The bandit dropped his weapon and collapsed, babbling of everything, just as I had told him. He began to tell his entire life story from his first memory. I growled, "Not everything, dumbass. Just why the here?" He began to babble again. I tried to make sense of his muddled, stuttering speech. With my information gathering done, I slit his throat. I slunk my way back to the wagon, glaring at everything as I passed. News had traveled quickly from the bandit that had escaped, and the Kazoo bandit group had sent some of its forces after us. It was because I had been so arrogant, so quick to underestimate. I had prematurely declared the battle as finished. I had presumed victory before the bodies hit the dirt, before the blood stained the ground. Unacceptable. The harsh sunlight glared sharply on my eyes as I walked from the dark forest into the comparatively open environment of the road. I looked at her and I took care of the bandits. She spoke harshly. "What did you find?" She had immediately assumed that I had left one alive from interrogation. A reasonable assumption. When you have eyes that can coax intel out of people, you would be expected to use it. Frustrated, I ran my fingers through my long dark hair, a trademark of the Uchiha Clan. Apparently, the client is distantly related to one of the nobles in the Fire Daimo's court. The Kazoo bandit group thinks that they can get money from capturing our client and holding him for ransom. Kerr and I considered the situation for a minute. If we hurry, we can make it to Yuga by the next day. She turned to me. "Kyuki, take position in the trees. Take out any bandits that come our way. I'll stay by the clients." I nodded, activated my sharing, and dashed away into the forest. This mission was a mess. Our client was being targeted by one of the most powerful bandit groups in the Land of Fire, and we were being tailed by them. I better get paid well for this one. The rest of the escort, surprisingly, went more or less fine. I suppose that after the first few groups of bandits had failed to capture the client, the Kazoo figured that the money wasn't worth the loss in fighters. Or at least that's what I thought. The return trip was not nearly as peaceful. I jumped to the side, narrowly avoiding several kanai that would have impaled me. Case in point, I strung several exploding tags onto a length of ninja wire, fastening the end of the wire onto a kanai. I cast Doti over the entire structure. Save the kanai. I threw the kanai, the invisible wire following it. The enemy bandit jumped to the side, avoiding the kanai. I sent a pulse of chakra through the ninja wire, the exploding tags detonating in sequence. A long string of explosions followed, and a huge cloud of smoke coated the area in a thick fog. A kanai sailed through the black smoke, heading for my face. Fujin, my teleportation ability was more efficient than the Shunshin when it came to its range. For the short distance jumps that it was capable of making, Fujin was both faster and more chakra efficient than the Shunshin, making it a viable choice. I watched the kanai sail past me, the Sharingan's processing power breaking down the angle it was in. With the Sharingan's help, I found the place in the smoke where the kanai came from. I grabbed the kanai from the air and threw it back in the location that I predicted. A satisfying thud from a body hitting the ground confirmed my hit and possibly a kill. I unsealed a few flower seeds and crouched, waiting for the smoke to clear. I didn't have to wait as four bandits came careening out of the smoke. I noticed that these ones actually had some kind of rough uniform with the symbol of the Kazoo bandit group plastered on the of their outfit. Juboko. The flower seeds in my hand exploded out into large flowers. I forced the flowers to produce an abnormal amount of pollen. The flowers that I had chosen already produced a ridiculous amount of pollen, so an abnormal amount really wasn't too much above the norm for these flowers. As such, it didn't take much chakra. The pollen exploded from the heads of the flowers in a large yellow cloud. The cloud of pollen swirled around, coating the bandits in a thick yellow layer of pollen. I flicked a tiny amount of fire chakra onto the pollen. Just a little, about the amount of fire that could be produced by striking a match. The pollen exploded into fire, and the bandits screamed as they were cooked alive. I smiled coy. I had always wanted to use this combination of attacks in live battle. I dodged to the side right as a few shuriken and kana flew at me. I narrowed my eyes at the rapidly clearing cloud of smoke. Only 2 of the bandits were left out of the rather large group that there had been before. Good. I was hoping for such a result. I had used quite a few explosive tags in the first attack. I prepared myself for the 2 bandits. They were either relatively skilled, being able to avoid the explosive, or incredibly lucky. Either way, I would kill them. I drew 2 chakudo. I can't quite remember why, but dual wielding in the last world had some sorts of complications that made it impractical in actual fights. Fighters in this world, however, were just that much better thanks to chakra. Answer: dual wielding came with all of the benefits and little of the downsides. I crouched down slightly and stuck my arms out, the swords also sticking out the side. I gathered my chakra, planning to shunshin. My plan was to have the swords behead the 2 bandits at the same time, spraying blood everywhere in an over-the-top display of gore and badassery. Before my shunshin took off though, the bandits froze in place. I hesitated, wondering what was happening. A pair of kana came from the trees and struck the 2 in their necks. They fell to the ground. Dead. You're slow. Karani was sitting on a tree branch, leaning against the trunk of the tree. I already cleared my bandit group. I've been waiting for you to finish. I stared at her, the pose I had struck with both swords held out, suddenly seeming less badass and more awkward and stupid. I slowly straightened up, sealing both swords back into my seals. I scowled, stuffing my hands into my pockets. Kerr and I only smirked in response. The village was only 2 hours away. Juboko. I watched in fascination as the tree twisted and grew slowly. Using Juboko, I could grow flowering trees, albeit significantly slower and at a significantly higher chak ra cost. The Hashiyama trees that littered Konoha and quite a bit of the Land of Fire were particularly interesting to watch. Growing them sucked the chakra out of me like nothing else, too. Flowering trees were already difficult to grow, but the Hashiyama trees especially. I thought that perhaps I could gain a sort of knockoff wood release from this ability, but Juboko was built for small flowers primarily, not for these slow-growing and large trees. It took far too long to grow the trees to be practical in combat, and it was much too draining on my reserves. The growth of the trees appeared to siphon out some of Hashiyama's residual chakra. As the trees grew under the tender care of Juboko, Hashiyama's chakra surged upwards in delight. The tree twisted into an unnaturally straight line, extending towards my outstretched hand. The stick curled at the end in a crook-like manner. I took the length of wood in my hands and held it reverently. I could see the chakra flowing with my sharing. I could feel it. The staff was pulsing with the condensed leftovers of Hashiyama's chakra. The thing had an intimate connection with nature. It was the perfect catalyst of water and earth chakra. I could feel its power. I spanned the staff in my hands. It felt balanced and easy to wield. I swung the staff experimentally for a minute or 2 before slamming the butt of the staff into the ground. I'm not quite certain what I was expecting. Maybe some crazy earth jutsu. Despite the latent power that I could feel in the staff, it was still just a stick at the moment. I couldn't harness the power quite yet, but it was there just at my fingertips. How would I use it? Could I unlock the secrets of the Mukan? Could I harness the chakra that Hashiyama left behind? Maybe I'll just stick it into my body somewhere, awaken the Renegan or whatever. As soon as I figure out how to implant or harness the staff's power, I'll make full use of the thing. I did one last spin with the staff, slipping it onto my back and sticking it there. At the moment, since I couldn't use the staff's potential power, I would just leave it there. It was light and small enough that it wouldn't hinder my movements, and it could be useful to have a weapon outside of the Seals. A ray of light glared through the thick forest, piercing a perfect path through the twisting maze of trees. I squinted at the sudden light source, eyes watering slightly as they took in the edges of the setting sun. I had met with Shiyu briefly earlier today. A few hours after I had gotten back from my mission, I brushed by Shiyu in the Uchiha Clan compound. He had slipped me a note. Training Ground 23. Sunset. I activated my sharing and gathered my chakra for a shunshin. The world blurred by as my sharing counted out the training grounds. 21, 22, 23. Is that my shunshin? I stopped my shunshin and looked at Shiui innocently. I have no idea what you're referring to. Shui stared at me for a moment, bewildered, slightly shocked, and mildly irritated. He rubbed his face with his hand. Whatever. A slightly uncomfortable silence settled over the two of us. After a minute of waiting for the other to reinitiate the conversation, I decided to speak up. So, the Hokage gave us a deadline to meet. Shisu nodded, suddenly alert and serious. He has given you the briefing. Then, we have 7 months to stop the coup. Or rather, we had 7 months. Now, we have about 6. If we can't stop it in time, the Hokage will order the extermination of the Uchiha clan. Shiui rubbed his face again, seeming very much exhausted. Yes. We stood in silence for a while, both of us contemplating. Shiu opened his mouth. I will attempt negotiations with the clan elders. The coup is in its beginning stages right now. It'll be much easier to stop it now than if we wait until it gains traction. I pondered my somewhat foggy memories trying to figure out how things would align now. Negotiations would be useless. Probably if I was remembering correctly, there was nothing that could talk the Uchiha out of the coup. But whatever made Shiui happy, I suppose there is a possibility, and a very good one, Shiui, that negotiations will fail. Shiu grimaced. I continued. Should that happen, we will need a contingency. I fingered the end of my newly made staff, tracing the wood with my fingers. In 6 months, should negotiations fail, we will be left with no choice but to use Koto Matsukami to forcefully stop the coup. There has to be another way. Shui seemed determined to find a peaceful solution. I glared at him with crimson-activated Sharingan. What other way is there? Negotiations will not fail, and the Mangekyou will not be needed. Frustrated, I yelled without thinking. Negotiations will fail, Shiui. In 6 months' time, we'll be left with no choice. You'll be left with no choice. Shiu went quiet, pondering what I said. There goes acting like I didn't know the future. I guess you think I haven't considered another way. You think I haven't consulted the waters. Shui remained silent because there is no other way. I'm not saying that the future I saw is the only future, but it is the most likely future, and it is the one that we're headed for. Shiu glowered at me, his sharing also activating in his anger. Then we will change that future. Well, change it and reach a peaceful solution. I slumped backwards, the crimson glow of my eyes fading away. This is the most peaceful solution, Shiui. The future that I'm suggesting is the most peaceful way to calm things down, and I know that for a fact. Shiu's eyes continued to burn. I will find a peaceful way. With that, Shiui shunched away. I stared at the spot where he disappeared for a few seconds before turning away and jamming my hands into my pockets. I looked up at the rapidly darkening sky and snorted, what an idiot. I had several flower pots in my room, each of them full of more flowers than they logically should be able to hold. Juboko's growth of flowers allowed me to ignore most normal gardening practices and cram the flowers as close together as I wanted. I carefully controlled the pollination of the flowers. I was experimenting to see if I could breed more and more useful flowers out of the ones that I already had. For example, I was running low on paralyzing solution and didn't feel like buying any. I harvested the flowers that produced the paralyzing solution and figured out which 2 plants had the highest yield. Using Juboko, I could break the rules of normal flower reproduction and force the 2 to breed with one another. Harvesting the seeds produced by such a process, I would replant using them. I would then repeat, figuring out which plants had the highest yield and breed those 2 together. I'm not quite certain that that was how reproduction was supposed to work, but Juboko apparently was able to circumvent most of the problems involved in such a process, and it worked. Just by growing the plants and figuring out which of them had the highest yields, I had collected enough paralyzing solution for my needs. I then stored any excess so that I could sell them later. The same process worked to increase any property of any plant. Say I wanted a poison to kill even faster or one that would stay dormant for weeks before it killed the target. Say my flowers to have a particular smell. Say I wanted a flower with a ton of thorns on it. Say I wanted some flowers to have some truly ridiculously bright colors. All I would have to do was selectively breed the flowers. It was such an incredibly broken process and it was beautiful. I've still yet to figure out how to harness the power of my Hashiyama staff. The thing's purpose eluded me. I could feel the chakra swirling in it. Hell, I could see it with my sharing. But I couldn't figure how to extract the chakra or even use the staff as a catalyst or implant the thing or really do anything other than swing the thing around like some mundane stick. I didn't even know how to start. Implanting foreign chakra was a tricky task, and it would take research to learn how to do it safely. You couldn't just stick the stuff inside of you and expect everything to work out fine. The foreign chakra could, clear's throat, potentially dominate your entire system and kill you from the inside out. Moa, Obito, and Orochimaru knew what they were doing with Hashiyama's cells, and they could implant the stuff safely inside of people. I, on the other hand, had no idea what I was doing, and I didn't want to take an unnecessary risk until I knew what I was doing. So, for now, the staff that I had grown out of the Hashiyama tree remained just a mundane stick. It was durable, it was balanced, and it was very nearly entirely useless for now at least. There was something immensely satisfying about training. Something that you struggled to do only a week before suddenly became doable, even easy. Genjutsu, Enjutsu, Taijutsu. I became proficient in all three. It was in such a manner that the next 3 months passed. I trained with Karani and became a shinobi of passable skill level. Perhaps I wasn't quite a prodigy. Perhaps I wasn't quite as flashy or dramatic as others, but there was no denying that I was both skilled and efficient. It was worth noting that I had cut most Enjutsu off the table. The only ones that I used regularly were the Shunshin, Fujin, Juboko, and a few C ranks. There was no point in using most of them really. I wasn't aiming to crush mountains or raise villages. I was aiming to kill, and I was aiming to do so either easily or quickly, preferably both. I could accomplish my objectives without the use of the expensive and flashy jutsu. So why bother using them? Through Genjutsu, Taijutsu, and the use of my weapons, I could finish my missions just fine. On a side note, I had discovered an interesting property of certain flowers. Apparently, my odd method of selectively breeding flowers had had some unintended consequences. Some of the more mundane flowers had mutated thanks to the rapid influx of chakra over multiple generations. In the wilderness, these sorts of mutations were rare, requiring a powerful source of chakra out in nature and for the animals or plants to stay within range of that chakra source long enough that they could breed. Over several generations, the chakra would somehow seep into the bodies of the organisms and give them some sort of mutation pertaining to chakra. It was not very well understood exactly how the chakra seeped into the animals, but it happened. The most prevalent theory for Kikgenka was actually that they were a form of beneficial chakra mutation. Juboko had unnaturally sped up this process, providing the chakra source and forcing the flowers to quickly speed through dozens of generations. Over the course of my selective breeding, a few of the flowers gained certain chakra mutations. One flower had gained the ability to store chakra. Not very much chakra, though. I wouldn't be using it to actually store chakra to power up my jutsu. What I would be using it for, though, was genjutsu. The flower could hold a minor genjutsu inside of it, releasing it into another ninja upon contact. I had begun using the petals of the flower when I shunned. Where other ninja used smoker leaves, I used flower petals with genjutsu stuffed inside of them. Another flower had gained the ability to absorb ambient chakra and convert it into fire chakra. It wasn't as useful of a property as it sounded, as the flower only had a tiny capacity for chakra. The flower wasn't constantly bursting into flames or anything, but it was certainly warm to the touch. The particular property of the flower also gave it a bit of an explosive flair when it was exposed to a large quantity of chakra. The pollen from the flower was particularly combustive in nature. All of this training and experimentation had led me to here. What? I put your name in for the Chunin exams. Kerr and I held out some forms for me. Unexpected. I took the forms in my hands, glancing over them. Don't you need a team for the exams? Kerr and I smiled. You're in luck. There's a Genin team, Team 12, that recently lost a member in a mission who were also about to take the exams. They need another member, and it just so happens that the one who died also used quite a bit of genjutsu, so you'll fill the role perfectly. I raised an eyebrow. Would that not make it seem like I was replacing their team member, though? Kerr and I waved her hand dismissively. They'll be fine, and even if they're not, they'll come along. Relax. It'll be fine. It was most certainly not fine. One of my teammates, a branch house Hyuga named Aiko, refused to even look at me. Given that she was a Hyuga, whether or not she was looking at me, just not facing me or actually not looking at me was rather hard to discern. The other Kunoiki, Yoshima Misako, glared at me with nothing short of hatred. Sensei, you liar. The hell is he doing here? Misako angrily questioned the Jonin that was leading us. Maruyama Hideo. He gave a nervous smile. Uchiha-san will be joining us for the upcoming Chunin exams. Misako glared at me, then back at her sensei. Is this some kind of joke? Hento is dead, and this is what happens. Hideo flinched when she spoke. Clearly, the death of his student had hit him hard as well. My head at her, she whipped her head around and poked me in the chest. Got something to say? I observed her body language and her speech patterns. Her grief is making her irrationally angry and prone to outbursts. I chose to remain silent as to not provoke her. Oh yeah, just keep your mouth shut. Why don't you? She turned away and muttered under her breath. Yuaha, right. Remaining silent isn't exactly the best way to calm down this sort of situation, huh? How about calm and impersonal reasoning? Your teammate is Misako whirled around, her eyes shining with tears and barely restrained anger. You shut the up. You don't know jack, about losing people. You just had your entire life handed to you on a silver platter. Just shut your mouth. Never mind. Then I dodged a kanai on reflex. My eyes widened and I looked at Misako who had thrown the kani. I knew she was angry, but that was a live kani. Had it hit, it could have killed me. Misako charged at me. I narrowed my eyes at her. I activated my sharing and stared into her eyes. She froze and fell to the ground unconscious. Since I would be working with these people in the future, it was probably be wise to use a less violent option to subdue. Her. I deactivated my sharing. Normally, I don't like using the overt sleep genjutsu, as it was significantly less efficient than most of my other genjutsu, and it required me to have eye contact with the Sharingan active. But it was one of the only non-violent ways to settle this. I could have restrained Misako with no problem with a multitude of methods, but many of those methods could come across as excessive. This shouldn't make me seem hostile, right? In any case, Misako had attacked first and was therefore in the wrong. Well, even if it did register as hostile, then it wouldn't matter. I had used the sharing to hypnotize her a bit. I wasn't quite certain if she really wanted to attend the exams in Kiri, so I inserted a little push in her mind I had put her to sleep. I glanced over to Aiko. She continued to stare off in some direction. Again, whether or not she was actually looking at me was hard to see. At the very least, she was indifferent to me rather than openly hostile like Misako had been. I looked at Hideo, the supposed leader of this squad. He stared forlornly into the middle distance. He was grief-stricken with the loss of his student, and he had no idea how to handle his similarly grieving remaining students. Amateur. I walked into a dango shop and walked towards the counter to buy some sweets. It was a place that I had frequented with Karani between training sessions. I had taken a liking to the dango. I wasn't quite obsessed like I had heard Anko was, but I did enjoy eating the sweet. I spotted Karani sitting in the corner of the shop at a table with Anko, Asuma, and some other ninja that I hadn't seen before. I abandoned my quest for sweets temporarily to stop by the table and say hello. I activated my sharing gunnan and blurred into a shunshin. I stopped right in front of them and watched them draw their weapons in slow motion. I slammed my hand down on the table. Huki Karani seemed rather surprised to see me. Sensei, you liar. What? At this point, several of the ninjas sitting at the table were drawing their weapons and pointing them at me. I ignored them. It was most certainly not fine. Karani continued to stare at me, bewildered. Hui. I have no idea what you're talking about. I had to fight my own squad after they both charged me and the Junin sensei did jack, __, amateurs. At this point, the Junin had sheathed their weapons, realizing that I wasn't a threat. Karani was still confused. They did what? Oh yes, just throw me into a team of grief-stricken amateurs who clearly have issues. I imitated her voice. Oh. Everything will work out. Everything will be fine. 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 Just fine. It was then that Asuma decided it would be a good time to intervene. Hey kid, I don't know who you are, but I looked at Asuma and eyed the cigarette that hung out of his mouth distastefully. Smoking is bad for you, you know. I drew on my chakra and made a finger gun. A small jet of water shooting out of my index finger. The water flew into Asuma's face and doused the cigarette. He, being a Junin, or perhaps a Tunin at this point, most certainly could have dodged the jet of water. His reasons for not doing so were unclear. Perhaps he wanted to see what would happen, was just testing me, or was just genuinely surprised. In any case, an awkward silence settled around the table. The silence was broken by Anko slapping her hand on the table and laughing rambunctiously. The kid's got guts. She wrapped one arm around Kurana's shoulder. Hey Kurini, who is this kid? Kurini exasperatedly held a hand to her face. My student leaned further in my direction, practically lying on Kurana's lap. At this point, she grinned leerously at me. Uchiha ha. I my head to the side. She was interested. Becoming the subject of a ninja's interest was either something that was very good or very, very bad. I absently sparred with Indra. I was rather surprised with his skills. Between my training, both with Karani and at the hospital, running missions, and experimenting with my abilities, I hardly had time to interact with Indra. Even still, he managed to make quite a bit of progress without a dedicated teacher. Even I had the edge on him still. I had significantly more combat experience after all, but the gap was certainly closing. I dodged to the side. I narrowed my eyes at Indra's extended arm. His punches and his movements in general were certainly getting quicker, but I was still faster. I eyed an opening in his guard and pistoned my arm forwards. Indra raised his arms in a futile attempt to block the strike. My fist impacted into his stomach, making Indra cry out slightly and stumble backward. With Indra still off balance, I performed a sweeping kick, knocking him onto the ground. Leg raised, I prepared to stomp on him, only for Indra to roll out of the way at the last moment. Good. His recoveries were also improving. Indra bounded back up and jumped at me. I crouched under his lunge and looked up. I internally sighed. His awkward jumping maneuver he had performed left his stomach exposed. I suppose this will teach him to not leave his guard open. I delivered a harsh blow to his stomach, which was likely already hurting from the blow I had dealt earlier. Indra squeaked in both pain and surprise. Taking advantage of his shocked state, I moved out from under him and sprang into the air. I brought my legs up and then kicked both feet down onto Indra's back. The kick sent Indra crashing downwards and I landed gracefully beside him. I squatted down and looked at him. You're improving. You definitely are, but you left yourself open. Indra moaned in response. All right, Sasaki. Enough lazing about. Get up. Indra rolled onto his back. Don't wanna. I rolled my eyes. I bought dango earlier today, but I suppose if you don't want it. It was slightly alarming how quickly Indra got up after that. The next day with Team 12 went far smoother than the last, which wasn't exactly saying much because I had been attacked yesterday. Literally, if today all we did was look at one another and talk about our feelings, it would have gone better than yesterday. We spent the day doing teamwork exercises. Reasonable. If we were to function as a team, we would need to have a good dynamic, but it was frustrating doing the things that we were doing, especially because all the training in my entire life up until this point had been mostly focused on individual strength. Working with the two kunoichi was difficult as neither of them were very willing to work with me, only doing so reluctantly. Misako disliked me quite a bit still, and Aiko, I assumed, was caught up in the Hyuga Uchiha Clan rivalry. The issue was further complicated by the fact that the two of them were woefully average. They weren't bad necessarily, but they weren't good either. They would inevitably lag behind me in combat procedures, which was frustrating. I would have to remedy their average combat abilities. Hideo appeared to be a rather average instructor, evidenced by the lack of significant progress the two had made. So, I would have to find a way to train them myself. I would not have weak teammates. So, as I walked back home, I tried to think of some way to train them. I supposed that I could just visit them. I didn't know where Misako lived, but I knew where the Hyuga clan compound was. I would first ask Fugaku for permission to go, then hop on over. You want to go where? Fugaku was having trouble with my request. The Hyuga compound. Why? I will be taking part in the Chunin exams in Kiri in 1 month. Fugaku smiled slightly, not in a fatherly sort of way, but more of an arrogant marvel at the power of the Uchiha clan sort of smile. Congratulations, Huki. The problem is the other 2 ninja in the squad that I've been assigned to are. I wrinkled my nose distastefully mediocre. I seek to remedy that. My purpose for visiting the Hyuga compound is to train with one of my teammates in order to elevate him to a passable level of combat prowess. Fugaku considered it for a minute. He closed his eyes. You wish to go to the Hyuga compound to train with a member of your team that you have deemed mediocre? Yes. Fugaku gave another arrogant smile. I could already hear what was going on in his head. A member of the Hyuga was so weak that a member of the Uchiha deemed it necessary to train with them. Not entirely accurate. Aiko wasn't weak by any means, just not good, but whatever floats his boat. Go. I bowed. Thank you, but be prepared to be turned away. The Hyuga are less than receptive of the Uchiha or really anybody other than themselves. I bowed once again and hurried out the room. I activated my Sharingan and Shanhen to a spot about 50 meters away from the Hyuga clan compound. There was no reason to alarm them by appearing right at the doorstep or worse actually inside their compound. The guards stiffened immediately with my arrival. Not that anyone without the sharing would be able to tell. Most of the Hyuga were naturally very stiff and formal. I suppose it came with living in a compound full of people who could watch your every move at any time. I walked up to one of the guards preparing to introduce myself and ask where Aiko was, but the guard beat me to it. State your name and business. I cleared my throat. I am Uchiha and I am here to see Hyuga Aiko again. The guards recoiled very slightly at the name Uchiha. They had seen the Uchiha crest on the back of my high-colored shirt. They had suspected, even knew that I was part of the clan, but I had confirmed it, and that made all the difference. Suspecting was entirely different than knowing. You come to see Hyuga on what grounds? Team-related matters. I gave a rather vague explanation. Team-related matters could be anything really, but it was that sort of vagueness that also sounded rather specific. It was apparently good enough for the Hyuga guards. We will inform the clan elders of your arrival. The guard made a few hand seals. Hand signs actually would be more accurate. The seals he made with his hands were not to convey chakra, but probably to relay a message. A Hyuga on the inside would receive his signal and act upon it. The Hyuga guard otherwise remained motionless. I stood along with the guards outside the walls of the Hyuga clan compound, waiting for them to come back with an answer for me. I was beginning to doubt the wisdom of coming here. It didn't matter what I said or did. It would make me seem arrogant. Hey, I thought you sucked, so I came over here to train you up so you don't hold me back during the Chunin exams. While that was exactly why I was here, nothing good would come with mentioning it as such. Perhaps I would spin it as auxiliary teamwork training or something. The clan elders have approved your entry. The guard had almost imperceptible amounts of distaste in his tone. I was surprised. I had doubted whether or not I would gain entry from the start, and a long wait for the elders to give me approval only further enforced the thought that I would be barred from entry. There had to be an ulterior motive here. The gates opened for me, and I walked inside. Aiko stared at me with her uncanny, pale eyes. Why are you here? I cleared my throat. During our brief training session, I noticed that you and Misako were both how to phrase this in a way that didn't seem overly conceited or rude. Painfully mediocre. Nice going, kui, she scowled at me. Uchiha, if all you came to do was, I will not have mediocre teammates. Aiko's mouth snapped closed with an audible click. There were a few ways that I could go about doing this. I suppose that I could play on the bitterness that the branch house felt. I never really understood why the Hyuga felt the need to divide everything like they did. It only produced divisions within the clan as well as insecurities from some members. Divisions and insecurities that people like me could use to their advantage. Will you settle for mediocre? Will you allow the main house to walk all over you, you mediocre kunoiki, because that is all you are? Average, ordinary, unremarkable, and invisible. I watched her engaged her reaction. She was angry certainly. She was almost shaking with fury. How could I exasperate that anger? The man who shut up. Aiko lashed out at me in the first display of anger that I've ever seen out of her. Her calm demeanor had been shaken. I watched the hit come. I didn't even need the sharing to counter it. I caught her arm by the wrist and held it. This is what I mean. I tugged on her arm, dislocating it. Aiko cried out in pain. You are weak. You are unfit to be my teammate. I swept Aiko's legs out from under her and she fell to the ground, moaning as her dislocated shoulder disagreed with the sudden impact. Why is it that you are content to be an average, unremarkable kunoichi? Aiko was strangely subdued. It is my fate to be this way. Fate has declared it so, and I sneered. Fate, fate, what a joke. I activated my sharing. The three tomo spinning into a pinwheel pattern. Fire. The water rushed in from all sides, creating a frigid, shallow pond. Aiko's long black hair shielded her eyes from my view. But with my sharing active, I could see the chakra flowing to her Bakugan. My sharing also caught the shift in body language as the Hyuga girl scarcely believed what she was seeing. It was both harder and easier to trick people with the Bakugan. Most visual genjutsu didn't work on them as no one but them knew what the world looked like from their point of view. That being said, the virtual immunity to visual genjutsu left them invulnerable to the few visual genjutsu that did work. Such as fire, the impossibility of the water rushing in seemingly from nowhere as far as the Bakugan was concerned, and the reality of the water baffled Aiko. I could see it in her body language. You see, reality is subjective. Fate is subjective. I my head at her and then as suddenly as it came, the water all disappeared in an instant. Aiko was once again entirely shocked. Strangely, the presence of her dojutsu was what made the illusion and my intense with it stronger. A person without a dojutsu could simply write it off as a genjutsu, even if they couldn't break it. A person with a dojutsu, however, was conditioned to believe that their eyes never lied, thus making an unbreakable genjutsu such as fire all the more effective. So why to continue to follow it? I crouched to her level. My hand glowed green with the mystic palm, and I hovered my hand over her dislocated shoulder. I could just shove it back in the mundane way, but this way was significantly more comfortable for her. Fate is malleable. You can shape it, bend it to your will. I looked at her straight on, my eyes crimson glow boring into her. The question is, will you? Here was where things may get a little iffy. There were some very large holes in my reasoning. Summoning water from nowhere did not at all imply that fate, if it existed, was malleable. Doing impossible things was practically an everyday occurrence in the shinobi world. I was relying on fire being just a little more impossible than the usual shinobi thing and for her to be shocked into hell that her Bakugan the all-seeing eyes had failed. It was basically the same thing that I had done with Shiui. And like with Shiui, Aiko reached out her arm shakily towards me. I grasped it firmly. We made eye contact, sharing on by organ crimson on white. We had reached an unspoken agreement. It worked like a charm. The next few training sessions with Hideo went reasonably well. Aiko was improving at a reasonable rate with me training with her, but Misako's progression remained stagnant. I had found Misako's address from Aiko and visited her. She had refused to train with me. In fact, she had refused to even let me in. There wasn't much to be done there. Misako disliked me and I couldn't bring myself to really care. I suppose I could have tried something with genjutsu, but in the end, it wasn't really worth it. She lacked talent, potential, and determination. There was no point. I would have to make do with just a single other good teammate. It should be fine. Team 7 back in canon had it worse than I did. At the very least, Misako was somewhat competent, if not good. She would serve just fine. What I was worried about, however, was Kiri. Yagura was still the Mazukage and there was quite a bit of civil unrest. Add that to the fact that people with Kekgenka were feared and sometimes persecuted. It wasn't quite like a witch hunt, but it was bad. Or at least I'm pretty sure it was bad. News of civil war had spread, but I'm not quite certain to what extent there were bloodline purges. But we had two Kekgenka on our team with Aiko and I both having dojutsu. We would have to be careful. And so we trained, and after Hideo had left, after Misako had dragged herself back home, Aiko and I trained long into the night. The gentle moonlight was all that illuminated the training grounds as we traded blows. We would fight until Aiko could stand no longer. Then, after a quick medical jutsu, I would carry her back to the Hyuga compound and hand her off to her family. Her determination was admirable. The training had had a noticeable effect on me as well. The predictive capabilities of the Sharingan had noticeably increased from keeping it active for so long. The Sharingan's chakra requirement was almost negligible. There was hardly any strain in keeping it active. A boon of the eternal Mangekyou. Perhaps it was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning now. I had already run through the routine of training with Aiko, and I stood in the clearing breathing deeply and taking in the quiet night in the forest. When I opened my eyes, they were spinning pinf wheels. I concentrated and forced my will into the world. Susanoo, how about an arm this time? I only chose to manifest the right side of the rib cage along with a skeletal arm. The arm twisted into the world, extending from the half of the ribs that I had chosen to create. This version of the Susanoo would not be used for defense. The lack of the left side of the rib cage meant that the Susanoo's defense had some rather large holes. I made the Susanoo's arm punch downwards. The fist impacted into the earth, the ground shattering like glass. I like to think that the offensive capabilities of this version of the Susanoo made up for the lack of defense. I dismissed my Susanoo, panting, sweating, and cramping up. It was both painful and chakra intensive to use the Susanoo for any length of time. I thought that I had been getting better with it, but apparently adding anything onto what I had made everything much, much worse. A new chakra source appeared in the clearing. Without even looking, I greeted him. Good evening, Shiwi. It's actually the morning now, Huki-san. I suppose it was. How have negotiations been going? I tried and failed to keep the smugness out of my voice. I knew full well that the negotiations have been going poorly. Shui had made very little impact, if any, like I told him. Shiu grimaced. Not well. At this rate, it looks like you'll need to use no. I will not use Koto Matsukami on my own family. I turned to face him, the red gleam of my eyes puncturing the dark. I spoke softly. You will regret it then. Silence. The Hoage's deadline draws nearer and nearer. At the same time, the idea of the coup is gaining more and more support. I looked up at the moon. 3 months of negotiations, Shiwi, you have accomplished nothing. You haven't done anything either. I'm making an effort. I'm wasting your time. The moon was oddly bright tonight. I cannot do anything. I have no say in the decisions of the clan. In fact, I shouldn't know about the coup at all. You, on the other hand, can quell the ideas of the coup in a single night. Why have you not done as such? Because you are afraid. I looked back at him and you are weak. There was silence in the clearing. I spoke. When the Uchiha start their revolution, my eyes bored into his. We will both die along with the clan. Uchiha blood will flood the streets. The silence stretched on. When that happens, one of us will die knowing that they did all that they could. The other will die knowing that there was more that they could have done, knowing that they could have stopped it. Shisu still hadn't moved or spoken. I have done my duty. I have informed you, the one with the power to stop the coup. There is nothing more that I alone can do. I turned away. The fate of the clan is in your hands, Shiui. Do your duty. Shui was already gone. I looked around the market in Konoha for the materials that I wanted. I was in search for some parts for a two I had in mind. I was looking to buy and put together a few things. Actually, one of them would be a grappling hook of sorts. I was looking for a chakra conductive kanai to serve as the hook part of it. My idea for the grappling hook was to fasten ninja wire which was made out of a material that conducted chakra to the end of a chakra conductive kanai in order to apply a long-range tree walking jutsu to water surface that the kanai embedded itself into. The chakra part of the thing was needed as I wasn't confident in the kunai's ability to hold my weight alone. The chakra also had the added bonus of making the whole construct both more durable and more deadly. I could have used chakra strings, but I wanted the grappling hook to also serve as a means of attack. I could throw the kanai at someone, stick to them, then hurl their body around like a rag doll. At the same time, the ninja wire that was attached to the end of the cane enforced with chakra would be whipping around. I suppose I could have accomplished the same thing again with a chakra string and some nature transformation of some kind. But then it would affect what the functionality of the kanai and things would get too complicated and chakra intensive ninja wire and chakra conductive kanai. And some kind of holding mechanism. Maybe I'll use some sort of wheel mechanism to hold the wire. Or perhaps I'll just use the normal spool just with a spinning part or something. Just something to hold it without inhibiting my movements as I threw the kanai. Speaking of throwing the kanai, ideally I'd like some sort of launching mechanism for the kanai. Dodo had his train thing, so I knew that methods for launching can certainly existed. It was probably easier and more convenient if I just manually threw it, though. Another thing that I was looking for was a rebreather. You never know when you'll be thrown underwater or be exposed to some unexpected airborne poison. I was hoping to find one in the form of a Kakashi-esque mask. I wasn't quite looking to emulate the guy, but it would be convenient to have it as some thin fabric sort of thing rather than a bulky apparatus. I also wanted to stock up on supplies in general. Kanai, shuriken, sunburn, ninja wire. I wanted to be prepared for the rapidly approaching Chunin exams. Picking up an assortment of materials that I figured I could put together, I began to walk home, holding a bag full of seemingly random stuff. Let's see if I can put something together. It took many attempts to get my grappling hook to turn out right. The small piles of broken wheels and tangled ninja wire could attest to that. Even in the end, it turned out as a rather crude mechanism, but it was functional. Thunk. The chakra conductive kanai bit right into the center of the target board. Grinning, I applied chakra through the length of wire that connected the mechanism attached to my arm to the kanai. The whole structure glowed faintly with chakra. The chakra running through the wire was minimal, not even visible with the eye. I could only make it out using the sharing. The chakra within the kanai made it stick to the board. I snapped my hand to the side, and the chakra in the wire complied. Half of the target board snapped off and flew along with the wire to the side. The chakra-enforced string cut through a small sapling entirely, but was stopped by one of the thicker trees. The kanai, still in motion, swung around the tree and wrapped around the trunk. Frowning, I forced more chakra through the wire, and snap, the half of the training board that was still stuck to the kanai exploded outwards in a cloud of sawdust and splinters. Oh yeah, if too much chakra is put into the tree climbing jutsu, then the object that's being stuck to tends to explode. The same thing happened once in the academy when I was screwing around with chakra strings. I wonder if I could use it on humans. Another thing that I wanted to test out was a sort of flamethrower. I still had the firefell, the one that took in ambient chakra and produced fire chakra. I wanted to use the flower in combat since it was more efficient than actually using jutsu. For that, I took a brief glance at seals. They were ridiculously complicated, so I only bought the most basic book from the marketplace. Even then, I only took a look at the sections that I actually needed. I would revisit them later. Seals were useful as hell. I had applied my cursory understanding on a storage seal. I only added a tiny part onto the seal, a little component that would store a bit of chakra and release it a moment later. The theory was that I would channel chakra into the seal. Some of it would be used to take the pollen of the firefell out of the seal, and the rest would be put into the secondary part of the seal. That part would then release the chakra stored within it and catch all of the pollen on fire. Except that the secondary part of the seal was entirely unnecessary. It was much easier just to manually inject chakra into the cloud of pollen when it was released. Additionally, I could choose when to ignite the pollen. I could shroud the entire battlefield in pollen, then light it up when the enemies thought they were safe. Sometimes it was best just to go the simpler route. Gadgets and new toys weren't the only things that I had to play with, though. I had continued my training at the hospital, finally getting my chakra controlled to the level that I could actually use some of the more fun medical judo. Of course, I had to bastardize a bunch of them for combat purposes, such as the Mystic Palm. I had a functional version of the thing for a while, but I had just realized something that I could do with it. The Mystic Palm worked by speeding up the body's natural healing process that is cell division with chakra. You know what happens when you overload chakra into a body and speed up that cell division too much. Cancer. I had accidentally done so when practicing on a fish in the hospital. I had decided to pump the fish full of chakra just to see what would happen. The fish had exploded into a gruesome fountain of gore as a tumor formed inside of its body. It was horrific, grisly and morbidly fascinating. A plethora of new toys, including medical jutsu, improved sharing skills, one good teammate, and one passable one. I was ready. Misako dragged herself over to me and gripped my shirt, clawing desperately at me. Kyuki, do something. Help me, please. I looked at her and smiled. Sure. My hands glowed with a diagnostic jutsu. Not that I really needed it. It was pretty easy to see exactly what was wrong. Misako was missing both an arm and a leg, the stumps of which were bleeding profusely. Ah. I know just how to fix this. I wiggled my fingers and coated them in chakra. Misako looked at me with a slight bit of hope. Thank you, Kyuki. I really see. I shoved my hand into her stomach. She stared downwards disbelievingly. Why? Blood began to pour from her mouth. I pulled my hand out of her abdomen, an organ clutched in my fingers. Sorry, Misako, but Aiko needs this more than you do. Misako's voice was only a hoarse whisper. But Kyo, I put a finger to her lips, making a shushing noise. Shush. Don't speak or strain yourself, Misako. You're making the blood come out faster. Misako's flesh was rapidly losing color, and Aiko needs that blood more than you do. I looked over at Aiko's fallen form. She wasn't exactly looking great, but she was certainly in better condition than Misako. All 4 limbs were attached and everything. You know, Misako, if you didn't want to die, maybe you should have trained when I asked you to. I made a tisk noise. If you were better, if you were more useful, maybe you would have been the one getting the organs. I hummed a soft tune as I began to put my medical training to use in healing Aiko. I absently thought back to how prior events lead up to now. Flashback. No jutsu. The first stage of the exams had gone rather smoothly. It was another one of those gimmicky morality tests, and we passed on to the second stage with really no problem. The goal of the second stage of Kyo's Chunin exams was rather straightforward. Make it to the finish line. There were no other objectives. There were no scrolls to collect or flags to capture. The thing that made it hard, though, was the fact that the finish line was a full 2 islands away. We were dropped on an uninhabited island in the land of water and were told to make it back to Kiri. Doing so required the teams to cross the expanses of water somehow. Some of the teams tried to cross the water using the water walking jutsu, a move that proved successful for some and lethally unsuccessful for others. Walking on such a wide stretch of water left one tired and for some of the less experienced ninja distracted as they concentrated to keep on the surface. That coupled with the lack of cover on the water left those that tried vulnerable to attack. I planned to shunshin to the other side. It was actually a good option. With some quick and rough calculations, I had figured that a shunshin to the next island would be faster and actually more chakra efficient than using water walking. It was perfect until I remembered that I had a team which I couldn't leave behind. I couldn't confidently say that I could carry 'em over in my shin and nobody other than me even could use the shunshin as a viable option. Because of the shinshin's high speed, either a very good instinctive knowledge of the land, or very good reflexes were required in order to navigate well with the shunshin. Or you could just use hack size. I wasn't so bothered anymore that I had to use the Sharingan to use the shunshin accurately. The amount of time that I could keep the Sharingan active was longer than before by a ridiculous margin. Unfortunately, neither of my teammates could shinin nearly as well as I could, so we were stuck using more mundane methods. Misako apparently couldn't water, so we had to go even more mundane. We planned to build a boat until we realized that none of us actually knew how to build a boat. It seemed so simple before we actually started to build it. In the end, we killed off another team and used their boat. I had killed another team and stolen their boat. I didn't want to deal with potential protests had I told my team that I was planning to kill another team. So, I murdered them discreetly and burned their bodies. I just left out the part where I killed them when I reported back to my team and told them that I just stole the boat. The boat had the disadvantage of being rather slow and having a lack of cover, but we weren't attacked. Most of the strong teams had likely already crossed the water using the water walking jutsu. Or perhaps we were just lucky. It was on the next island that things started to get a little messy. I saw Aiko stiffen. Something had likely come into the range of her Bakugan. I had learned while training with Aiko that her range with the Bakugan was pitifully low. Well, actually, it was average for a ninja of her caliber. While an adult Jun and Hyuga could see for kilometers with their Bakugan, Aiko, a slightly above average genin, could see for maybe 50 meters. That meant that whatever was coming for us was very close. I immediately activated my Sharingan and shunshined away into the forest. A moment later, the forest erupted into an explosion. After the explosion, I hadn't bothered to chase after the team that had bombed us. I had watched the forest for chakra signatures, and there were none, save for my own team. And that brings us to now harvesting Misako's cooling corpse for parts to transplant into Aiko. Aiko had escaped the blast much better than Misako had. I suspected that it was because of the extra training she did with me. She was able to react quickly, but apparently not that quickly. She had sustained injuries and rather severe ones at that. Still not as bad as Misako. Speaking of Misako, I had rendered basically her entire body at this point. Aiko only really needed a single organ and some blood, but I wanted to take the rest of Misako's body parts, at least the undamaged parts, because you never know. Yeah, and it's not like she's using them anymore. It was a lucky thing that the organs that I needed from Misako were more or less undamaged and that she had the same blood type as Aiko. Otherwise, things would have been really bad. I was passable with medical jutsu now, but clearly not good enough to heal a severely damaged organ, and certainly no good enough to change a blood type. I might have been able to just fabricate the blood using the mystic palm, but again, I wasn't sure that I was good enough for that yet. Better to use already existing blood if it's there. I decided to set up a perimeter of traps and camp out here until Aiko's condition stabilized. When she was safe to move around, I would carry her and water to the finish line. Should be relatively easy. The minute dawn broke, I checked over Aiko. She was in good enough condition to move, so I picked her up and began hopping through the woods. I thought over what had happened to my Asuko. What reason would I give for her cause of death? Oh, she had like 1 foot in the grave already, so I took her organs and saved my other teammate instead. That would go over well. I'd probably just tell them that Misako died to an explosion and that her body had been entirely obliterated by the blast. Actually, screw that last part. She had died in the explosion, but parts of her body were still usable for transplantation. Just in case they ever found out about Aiko's mismatched organs, I'd have a cover story. I activated my Sharingan and took a quick scan around, narrowing my eyes when I saw 3 chakra signatures up ahead. They were another team. They might prove to be a problem. I put Aiko down on the ground and administered some sleeping solution to her to keep her unconscious. I then cast several layers of genjutsu over her to hide her, finally ending with a chakra suppression seal. I had basically drugged her, hid her, and prevented her from using any jutsu. But in the end, she was out of the way and virtually undetectable. I shunshined through the forest towards the chakra signatures that I had seen. Stopping a little ways away on a tree branch, I peered downwards at the 3 genin that were traveling on the forest floor. They were Iwan Nin. I drew a little bit of chakra into my palms and rubbed them together, creating a light rustling noise. The noise could easily be passed off as a sound of the forest, and it passed by unnoticed by the team below me. The noise had carried a genjutsu that was targeted at 2 of the 3 genin. The genjutsu would make them keep seeing everything exactly the way it was with the 3rd teammate walking beside them. Even when in reality he was dead. I had thrown a poison sunburn at him and he fell quietly to the ground. His teammates completely unaware of his death. My Sharing observed him and I made a very nearly perfect henge into him. I walked into the place where he had once been walking and cancelled the genjutsu on the 2 other ninja. I turned to the one beside me. Hey, did you hear that noise? He turned and looked at me. What? No. He froze, caught under a genjutsu. The red glow of my Sharing shone under the henge that I was wearing. The final member of the team frowned and looked over at us. Ike Dezo, you guys good there? A kanai tore into her neck, killing her. I retrieved the kanai that was lodged in her body and slit the other guy's throat with it. I shunshined back to where I had left Aiko. Concealing it to such an extreme seemed kind of superfluous now that the combat had ended rather anticlimactically, but better safe than sorry, I suppose. I hoisted her onto my shoulder and carried her across the water to the final island. It was a good thing that Kiri cared far less about team performance than Konoha did. We had done well enough and we would be moving on to the final stage, a tournament. There were no preliminaries. Only 2 other teams had managed to pass. And of those 2 other teams, only one had made it through with no casualties. In total, there were only 6 participants moving on to the 3rd stage. This will be a real shitty tournament. I guess Kiri was actually so desperate for people to move on that they allowed a team with only a single serve. Iving member to move on to the tournament round. This was a brutal Chunin exams. Well, it wasn't really all that deadly. Plenty of teams had simply gotten stranded on some island or another and had failed to make it to the finish line by the end. Kiri had to dispatch rescue teams. So really, a good 3/4 of them had made it out alive. We were given just 2 weeks to prepare compared to the month that was given in canon. That would be just fine. It was back to training the minute we got back to Konoha. After a single day of rest, I hit the training fields. But first, Susanoo, I had to check on Shui. I tried for an entire skeleton this time. The arms split apart at the elbows to make 4 separate arms. The embarrassingly pink structure extended around me, draining my chakra at an alarming rate. I was getting better, though. Shui appeared in the training ground, and I dismissed my Susanoo. I looked at him impassively and waited for him to start off the discussion. Shui sighed. I will use Koto Amatsukami on Fugaku-sama in 5 days. I gave him an inquisitive glance. Oh yes. Shui had never looked more resigned. There are only 2.5 months to go before the Hoage deadline and the Uchiha Council has nearly reached a decision. Ah. So that was what pushed Shiu. Negotiations have failed and things were very nearly set in stone. Only the clan head could veto the decision. Now, if I may ask, why 5 days? Why not this very night? I still hold on to the hope that the council will reconsider. The final vote will take place in 4 days. If the vote turns out to be in favor of the coup, then I will have no choice. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Even now, the peace-loving idiot wanted to wait. Well, best of luck, Shui. Shiu gave me a shallow bow. Farewell, Kyuki-san. He shunched out of the training ground. That sounded strangely final. I sat cross-legged on the ground. I was trying to hone my chakra sensory techniques. Most mid-tier and above ninja had at least some level of chakra sensing. Perhaps not to the level of an actual sensonin, but certainly enough to feel out particularly powerful jutsu and the like. As such, I felt it necessary to train in chakra sensing. It was a good skill to have. Anyways, I felt something enter the training ground that I was in. I couldn't tell who it was, and my sensory abilities would likely never reach the level where I could tell who people were by their chakra signatures. I cracked an eye open. Ah, Kurani-sensei. Hello. I closed my eyes again, trying to immerse myself back into trying to sense things. The outlines were all blurry and undefined. How have you been doing, Chi? I stood up, my concentration broken. I'm fine. Kerr and I looked at me doubtingly. Just know if you ever need anyone to talk to, I'm here. I was slightly confused, but gave her a shallow bow. Hi, Kerr and I sensei. Lady, you've seen me massacre 2 separate bandit camps. What makes you think I'll be traumatized by the death of one person? Especially one that I literally harvested the corpse of. To be fair, teammates are supposed to be important with all the will of fire junk. So, I suppose that if I were particularly impressionable, like a normal child should be, that could have left an impact on me. Team Hideo had been more or less disbanded. It hadn't officially been disbanded, but we rarely met anymore. Aiko, after passing the second stage, began receiving more training from her clan. You're welcome, Aiko. I myself had gone back to Kurani for training. Hideo, last I heard, was planning on going into the Anbu. The death of 2 of his students in such quick succession had done a number on his psyche. While he technically couldn't just leave us since we were getting training from outside sources, and everyone felt kind of bad for him, no one really questioned it. It was kind of similar to how Kakashi left Naruto in the care of Ibis to train Sasuke in canon. So long as there was an alternative in place, no one cared. Kurani had set me to train with sensory jutsu, hence my earlier training. I had asked her about the summoning jutsu, but she had refused, saying that the process of reverse summoning oneself to get a summon was dangerous. I suppose that was true. Most of the powerful ninja got summons, though, so I definitely wanted some. Eventually, I soon settled back into the routine of training and experimenting. It was the night of the 5th day. The elders had reached the decision yesterday. The coup would go on. In a few short months, the Uchiha planned to rebel. Shiui would be able to stop things, though. His attempt to brainwash Fugaku was much earlier now than in canon, so hopefully Danzo wouldn't intercept him. The Hokage had given us a very open-ended schedule. After all, said Danzo wouldn't know when to show up unless he spied on us. That is, Shiui was an elite ninja and had 2 shots with Koto Matsukami. He wouldn't screw things up. Well, he did in canon. There's no point in worrying, I guess. Worst case scenario, the Hokage exterminates all of the Uchiha and I have to bail on the village. I was more confident in my ability to survive as a nuke nin now that I've seen my skills in comparison to other genin. I sat down on the ground, closing my eyes and concentrating. I was practicing my sensory jutsu once again. With enough practice, I would eventually be able to do such without having to assume a meditative state. My awareness stretched into a pitifully small area of relatively accurate sensing and a comparatively vast ocean of vague shadows. I frowned as I felt a large and familiar chakra pulse. After a moment of consideration, I shrugged it off. Plenty of shinobi were probably practicing at the moment, and one of them had perhaps used a large jutsu that I was familiar with, but that one had felt rather sharing why, for a lack of a better term. My frown deepened. I wasn't the best at categorizing things with sensing yet, but there was a distinct sense of unease now. Actually, it was probably Shiui casting his Koto Matsukami. But I've never felt or even seen Koto Matsukami in use before. The familiarity of the jutsu wouldn't register if I wasn't familiar with the jutsu used. Of course, if I had experienced Kototsuki, I suppose I wouldn't remember it now, would I? Debatable, actually. If I was subject to Koto Matsukami, then there perhaps would be some level of recognition. I tensed as I felt another familiar jutsu, one that was even more recognizable than the first one. My blood felt like ice as I thought of the implications of that chakra. Susanoo. I had used Susanoo enough that I could tell that it was the one, even from the blurry and vague chakra that I had sensed. Itachi awakened his Mangekyou in canon from watching Shiu's suicide, which hadn't happened yet. The only 2 known Mangekyou uses in Konoha were Fugaku and Shiui. Fugaku never demonstrated the use of the Susanoo in canon. This left only Shiui. Perhaps I should have told him about Danzo. I didn't because I didn't think that Danzo would get involved this time around, but clearly that was a dumbass decision. The earlier chakra that I had sensed was probably the Izanagi then. Damn it, Danzo already had one of Shui's eyes. Shiui was pulling out his last-ditch defense against the root operatives. Then growling, I activated my Sharingan and Shunshin to the location where I felt the Susanoo. I arrived at the scene. It was hell. Charred bodies laid on the ground. There were a few dead operatives that were stuck to trees, pinned there by large green needles. This was Shiui's work. He hated violence, but something had clearly forced his hand. My eyes span around searching for a chakra signature. There I Shunshin to the chakra signature that I saw. It was Shiui. His chakra was almost entirely depleted. He was weak and he was dying. There was no way that he could brainwash the clan now. And he only had one eye remaining. He croaked out, "Kyuki, you look like, Shisu. Kyuki, I have failed." I didn't reply. I'm bleeding out too quickly. I will probably die here. There's no time to do anything. You can't carry people with your shin and you can't hop to the hospital fast enough to save me. This is probably it for me. Well, I had some medical jutsu. Huki, you have to continue the mission. Wait, is this going where I think it's going? Giving you my eye. My other eye is in Danzo's hands. You have to retrieve it. You must finish the mission. I know you can do it, Kuki. You have all of that future knowledge. I'm putting my faith in you, Kuki. Well, screw the medical jutsu. Die faster, Shui. Give me your eye already. Oh, the possibilities. I could brainwash the Hokage and get a cage-level bodyguard. Or better yet, I could brainwash Obito and teleport wherever, then play Pokemon with the members of the Akatsuki. Or Shiui grimaced. He had an almost disapproving look on his face. Screw you. Just die already. Give me your eyeball. Yeah. Screw the clan. Once I had Koto Matsukami, I could just murder them all with my new minions, then harvest their eyes for hundreds of Azonages. I could one last thing. I'm sorry. I drowned in crimson. I cradled Shiu-sama's precious eye in my hands. I gazed upon Shiui-sama's corpse lovingly, recollecting all of the fond memories that we had shared together. Shiu-sama had taught me so much. Serve the village, obey your super ears. Haha, you're so funny, Shiui-sama. Value your comrades. Becomist strong. What a great thinker. What an amazing mind. Truly, today is a tragic day. For we have lost the most loyal of ninja, Shiui-sama. Eliminate all threats to the village. Follow the will of fire. I love you, Shiui-sama. I smiled. I looked up and smiled some more. I thought back to the corpses that Shiui-sama had left and smiled even more. Be happy, smile. You are loved. I love you, Shiui-sama. I watched Shiui-sama's body burn. Though it pained me to do it, it was what Shiui-sama would have wanted me to do. It would be a terrible thing if anyone obtained a piece of Shiui-sama, especially in a world where one could be resurrected to fight against the village. I felt a presence behind me. I turned around and saw him. Ah. Danzo, how nice to see you. Danzo peered at me with his single exposed eye. Indy. Ah. So you spied on us, didn't you? You heard us planning. Your precious root heard us. That's how you knew. Danzo looked at me with a dispassionate expression. And then you intercepted him. You surrounded the entire Uchiha compound with your root agents so that Shiui-sama couldn't get in. Danzo remained silent. I put on a dreamy expression. I was there, Danzo. I watched you steal Shiui-sama's eye. Oh. How much I miss Shiui-sama already. I clasped my hands together. My sharing activated and my demeanor shifted. I looked at Danzo with a crazed gleam in my eyes. Give me the eye, Danzo. Danzo remained still. A high-pitched giggle escaped from my lips. I pondered the advice of Shisui-sama. Serve the village. Obey your superiors. Danzo was certainly my superior, but he was inferior in rank to the Hokage who had directly assigned the mission to me. As such, the Hokage's orders should be followed. Danzo was an asset to the village, but so were the Uchiha. The Uchiha were arguably more valuable than Danzo, although with Root, it was a bit hard to tell. But Danzo was not only infringing on clan rights, being a bloodline thief and all, but he was interfering with an S-rank mission, actively working against me, another asset of the village, except I had orders from the village's highest authority. This all meant that Danzo was an obstacle, an enemy of the village. Eliminate all threats to the village. My decision was made. Thank you, Shiui-sama, for even in death, you continue to guide me. I closed the distance between us in a shunshin. My shunshin was still nowhere near as beautiful as Shiui-sama's shunshin, but it would do. I exited the shunshin with my left arm extended, reaching for the eye that I knew to be under Dano's bandages. Shink, 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 shink. 4 different blades pierced my body before I reached him, holding me in place. I grinned at Danzo, even as the blood began to stain my teeth. My eyes span in a frenzy of movement. Fujin, I teleported forwards just that little bit that was required. To his credit, Danzo barely even flinched as I tore the eye out of his socket. I have filled out one of Shiui-sama's final orders. I laughed, paying little mind to the blood that flowed out of my very much open wounds. Susanoo, my skeletal Susanoo came into life, roaring and wildly swing its arms around. The ground was being pounded into rubble, and through the thin clouds of debris, I saw that blood had been spilled. I retrieved a tube of preservative fluid, the same one that had once housed Mother's eyes, and dropped Ped Shishui into it. It joined its twin. Then, all at once, I felt the strain of keeping the Susanoo active. My wound and the pain of using the Susanoo forced me to the ground, panting and shaking. Danzo appeared over me instantly. I am done playing games with you, child. I attempted to rise up in defiance. Danzo weaved some hand seals at an ungodly pace. I watched the wind that he generated approach me with the sharing. Fujin, it was not far enough. And then I had no legs. I cackled, my raspy laugh becoming louder and louder. Be happy. Smile. You are loved. This was nothing. This was nothing more than what I would do for Shiui-sama. I began to gather my chakra together for a shunshin. More hand seals were made by Danzo. Another wave of wind rushed at me and suddenly my left arm was gone. And then I disappeared into a shunshin. I sat slumped against a tree in the forest just outside of the Uchiha compound. The perimeter that Danzo had set up to counter Shiui had disappeared. They were probably ordered to leave as soon as Shiui showed up for fear of being caught by the Uchiha. I was bleeding out of the multiple severe wounds that I had suffered. My blood was pooling up on the ground in dark puddles. A Zanagi. And then I was fine. I growled angrily. After the high of combat had worn off, I had gotten time to reflect on what happened. I had gotten lucky. Danzo and Root weren't expecting half of the things that I had pulled out. The only reason that I had managed to succeed was because of the element of surprise. Danzo wasn't expecting me to teleport, but I did, and it costed him Shiyu-sama's eye. Root probably had intel on my Susanoo, but they had never seen it actually used like this. Shiyu-sama didn't die for me to play dice with fate. He died so that I could serve the village and obey my superiors and value my comrades, become strong, and eliminate all threats to the village, and follow He will of fire. So, I had to train. I couldn't afford to be lazy at all. Not when so much was hinging on me. Shui-sama had put his faith in me, not only for this mission, but for all of my missions. But first, I pulled out the tube that contained Shiyu-sama's eyes. I took one of them out. Strangely, one of Shiyu-sama's eyes seemed tired somehow, as though he used it. It would require a decade of recharge time for it to be usable once more. I wonder what he used it on. No matter, Shiyu-sama probably had his reasons, even if I couldn't decipher them. There was still the one that I took from Danzo, and he had yet to use that one. Tearing out my useless eye, I reverently placed Shiyu-sama's eye into my empty socket. I gently applied some medical jutsu to the spot. Now you can watch over me forever and ever, Shiyu-sama. I shivered in delight at the distinct feeling of rightness having Shiyu-sama's eye inside of me. As for the other eye, exposing it to Hashiyama's chakra would drastically reduce the cooldown time of the eye. I suppose I've found a use for my staff. Then before I could do anything, I froze, feeling a powerful chakra enter my range. I immediately activated my Sharingan and turned towards the source of the chakra, a swirling mask. Toby, he was fast. Not quite as fast as Shiyu-sama, but still fast. There was no time to mold chakra for a shunshin. Fujin wouldn't carry me far enough to avoid the blade swinging at my neck. And even if it did, there was nothing stopping him from swinging it at me once again. Well, there were two things that I could do. Either a Zanagi or Koto Amatsukami. Toby stopped dead in his charge, enraptured in the calm glow of my eyes. Serve me. Toby stood deathly still. I felt Shiyu-sama's eye drain of energy and I knew that there was a very good chance that I had failed one of Shiyu-sama's objectives. With the second charge of Koto Matsukami used up, it would be a long time before I could use it again. Even with the Hashiyama chakra in my staff, even if I implanted the eyes into Toby, who had Hashiyama implants, it would take too long for them to recharge. You must finish the mission. I had failed. Or had I quelled the Uchiha rebellion before it even starts? The objective that the Hokage had given us could be interpreted in several ways. They couldn't rebel if they were all dead. Now could they? I giggled. Oh. Toby. Toby snapped into attentiveness, staring at me intently, waiting for orders. I hesitated in giving him the order to murder the Uchiha clan. It would be so easy. After all, he had helped in the massacre in canon. There was no reason that he couldn't do it again. Was I perhaps disobeying one of Shiyu-sama's orders? Serve the village. Obey your superiors. Value your comrades. Become strong. Eliminate all threats to the village. Follow the will of fire. The Uchiha clan was a plague. They would all succumb to the curse of hatred, save a few. The fact that they were planning the coup was testament to that. I would be serving the village if I got rid of them. But value your comrades. The Uchiha were my comrades. Shiyu-sama's orders crossed over one another. Which one would I follow? How could I make a path through them without crossing over another? Or perhaps I could find a peaceful way to end the rebellion. No, if the Uchiha clan survived, then they would surely rebel again. Perhaps reintegrating them into the village would be the solution. I would have to think upon it. Perhaps prioritize things. Much like others pondered and interpreted the sacred writings of their religions, I would ponder and interpret the word of Shui-sama. But one thing was for certain. Kill Danzo for me, won't you? Expose him. Expose Root. Bring me his head. Toby disappeared in a swirling distortion. Danzo's severed head leaked crimson fluid onto the Hoage's desk and his paperwork. What have you done? I smiled at the Hogue. I have discovered an imposter in our ranks. The Hokage looked at me as though I were insane. An imposter. I nodded. A false believer in the will of fire, a cancerous growth in the leaf, a threat to the village. I licked me lips and my smile grew wider, and threats to the village must be terminated. The Hokage only stared at me, and then I saw nothing. Enonoi was scared. He had walked through countless minds before, but this one had felt wrong. It's almost like he has two separate sets of memories. Oh. The Hokage was curious. One of them is locked somehow. The other set is, well, it's complicated. Quote. Abiki motioned for Inanoiki to continue. And Hissen looked equally intrigued. I don't know what Uchiha Shisui did, and I don't think I even want to know, but now has some sort of almost compulsive loyalty to the leaf. Enaki paused, looking for the words. All of the memories that I could see were corrupted somehow. Serve the village. Obey your superiors. Value your comrades. Become strong. Eliminate all threats to the village. Follow the will of fire. Nearly all of his logic follows at least one of those statements. Abeki processed the information quietly while Hissen puffed on his pipe. What happens if the statements contradict one another? Like if on a mission saving his comrades would hinder the objective, therefore running across, obey your superiors. I think that either hell have to prioritize or hell suffer a breakdown. I think the former though, as was demonstrated with Danzo. His wish to kill Danzo seemed to contradict the obey your superiors command. But Kyuki believed that since Danzo was interfering with the mission, he was a threat and enacted the eliminate all threats to the village command. Abeki and Hirozen were quiet, but there was more that Enonoi had to report. Not only that, but Kyuki appears to have some kind of foreknowledge. Both Abeki and the Hoage's eyebrows raised at that, or at least Shiui seemed to think so. One of his last words to Kuki were, "You have all that future knowledge. I'm putting my faith in you, Kyuki." Abeki scowled. Is it true? It's hard to say. Kuki's memories are so muddled and messed up from whatever Shiui did that it's hard to get anything coherent out his head other than the orders that were given in a few memories with Shiui. Heen rubbed his temples. Is he fit for duty? It's hard to say. He's not a flight risk, and I highly doubt he'll choose to kill any more of his superiors. But the worry about Kuki's sanity was left unspoken, but everybody in the room was thinking it. The Hokage nodded. You are dismissed, Inoiki. When Inoiki had left the room, Abeki turned towards Hirozen. Kyuki spoke the truth with Danzo. We found his hideout after Kyuki dealt with Danzo. Root was still assembled and there were files. The Hokage grimly nodded. Make sure they're on my desk tomorrow morning. Abeki nodded. You are dismissed. The Uchiha clan went insane when they found out that I, the clan head's son, was stuck in a cell and interrogated. Probably didn't help the feelings of resentment that they held towards the village. I could have escaped by calling Toby, but that would be in violation of Shiu's orders. Anyways, with the backlash from the clan and with the Hokage finding Danzo guilty after all, I was released from my holding cell too. Ickly. But I had been held in the cell for 2 days. Those 2 days had been enough to get my thoughts together. It helped that mindwalking was an art that made one more introspective. Getting mentally violated tended to make you more aware your own thoughts and past actions. Yamanaka, with all of the introspective thinking and time to myself, I had become much more collected than before. Where before I was taking Shiu-sama's word to the extreme, intoxicated by the soothing, oh so righteousness of Shui-sama's advice. Oh, how much I ahum. I realize now that Shui-sama's word be taken in a more subtle manner. Something that could be done all the time. Shui-sama's word was applicable to extreme acts of faith, but it was more relevant to everyday things. Which is why I had taken to smiling all the time. Be happy. Smile. You are loved. I am happy. I am loved. And thus, I smile. At random intervals, I would pull my lips back and bare my teeth in a cheery grin. I could not smile all the time. Not only did I have to sleep, but at times it felt as though my smile was slowly dripping off my face. No matter how hard I concentrated, it appeared as though I could not maintain the smile. I had considered stitching my face up or even cutting it into a permanent Glasgow smile, but in the end, I decided that doing so would be in contradiction with Serve the Village. I would be hurting myself, an asset of the village for no gain for the village. How could I best apply Shui-sama's word to everyday existence? That was a question that I pondered for the 2 days that I was in the cell. I found a multitude of ways to do so. One of the most important ones was to train, become stronger. I need to be strong to serve the village. I need to be strong to save my comrades. I need to be strong to eliminate all threats to the village. I love you, Shui-sama Karani-sensei. My smile is no longer the perfect fake thing that I wore before, but rather the absolutely genuine thing. Truthful is better than perfect in some cases. Quote. Qui Karani appeared to mildly disturbed as well as slightly shocked. My actual smile is woefully bland and a tad on the creepy side. Whether it was like that originally or it became that way after 2 consecutive days of trying to SMI. Lure as much as possible is unknown, but it is genuine. Karani-sensei, I was thinking that with only a week left until the Tunin exams, we could mostly focus on refining my skills rather than building new ones. Unless you have something else in mind, Kerr and I, not being a trained kunoichi for nothing, almost immediately snapped out of her surprise. Oh yes, of course. Well, let's get started. Kyuki, I began sparring once more with Inden. No, Sasake. Indra was my personal weapon. Sasake was the weapon of the village. I began sparring once more with Sasuke. There. If he was surprised by my new sporadic grins, he didn't show it. He was just as welcoming for his brother as he was before. How adorable. There would be little time to have activities like this in the future. With the massacre still looming ahead, it seemed more and more likely that there would be in reality no time for this in the future. With the news of Shua's suicide reaching the clan came accusations. The Uchiha clan was pointing fingers at anybody except for the people responsible. The village couldn't disclose such sensitive information either. The involvement of Danzo, a high-ranking and well-respected figure in Shiu's death, would cause an outrage, only exasperating the situation. Not only that, but it would cause all clans, not just the Uchiha, to lose trust in the administration. Keeping such important information from the clan involved was necessary. Then things were escalating much too quickly for my liking. I had trained with Karana for the past few days, and the Chunin exams were drawing closer. We would be leaving for them later this morning. Actually, Toby, I called out to the empty forest. I would need him. My plan was to use Toba's control over Yagura to bring the Mazukage over here. I wasn't sure whether that would help the situation over in Curia if it would cause it to grow worse. Cause of the chaos following the loss of the cage. Either way, it didn't matter. I just needed Yagura. I planned to use Yagura somehow to deter the massacre. I hadn't finished working through the exact details yet. I would probably run it through the Hokage, although he did give me basically free reign over the mission in his mission briefing months. Best case scenario, Konoha receives an undeniably powerful weapon. Worst case scenario, we get rid of Yagura. All I needed was Toby. He did not keep me waiting, walking out of the forest almost immediately after I called him. I have no idea how he heard me, just that he did. I activated my Sharingan and looked at him. Odd. His chakra appears to be diminishing somehow. In fact, there were a few odd details that I hadn't really paid much mind to before. The most prominent of which was the strange white mask that he wore instead of the orange one. They both had pretty much the same design, though, with the swirl centering on the right eye. Although, I don't quite remember the outfit that was fully white, just with a cloak draped over it. I suppose it is earlier now in the series than the massacre, so perhaps he had a costume switch later on. He had several costume switches throughout the series, so I suppose it isn't such a huge deal that his outfit was different. Show me you taijutsu run through the kata you've learned. He was distinctly slower than I remember him being. His movements were slow and sloppy, and there appeared to be a great strain with everything. I frowned, and realizing that I wouldn't get anything useful taijutsu related out of him, I stopped him. Whatever. It's not like I really needed more taijutsu at this point. I wouldn't be able to use it effectively in the tournament even if I copied it. It wouldn't do to just copy something and then blindly use it later. I would have to investigate though. Having a faulty minion would be a no-no. I tried to cast a diagnostic jutsu on him, but it came back empty. Made sense. I guess if he could be figured out by a simple diagnostic jutsu, everyone would have already known who he was. Toby, take off your mask. If I could get some exposed skin, then I could probably cast the jutsu. Toby didn't move. My tone became warning. Toby, take off your mask. Toby remained motionless. Obito. I addressed him by his real name. That was an order. He was still. I growled. Stay still. That at least Toby obeyed. I walked forwards and gripped his chin with my hand. My hand found no purchase on his mask. It was like the mask was part of his body or something. I frowned. Toby, strip. Toby obediently followed my orders. My frown deepened as I saw that his hands were shaking. Whether it was from exhaustion or nervousness, it was hard to tell. Even with the Sharingan active. Tob crick with the sharing. I just barely managed to dodge out of the way of the hand that came out of Toba's chest. The white outfit that he was wearing appeared to crack open as Toby forced himself out of it. Oh. Toby was wearing the other Toby. The white Zetsu one. It was that white Zetsu that opened up and could be worn as a suit. Obito had worn it after Ren's death while murdering those Kirin Nin. And he had worn it afterwards as well when he was confronting the AIM orphans. He had eventually taken Toby off, but this was significantly earlier than when Itachi carried out the massacre in canon. So, I guess he hadn't made the switch yet. Obito was currently trying to kill me, but he had obeyed me during the week, which meant that I had not Kod's Toby, but rather Toby. The white Zetsu Toby. I'll just call him Guru. It was his nickname in the series. Anyways, Guruguru had refused to let Obito get out of him and controlled him in a similar way that Black Zetsu would eventually control Obito. Clearly, Guruguru's methods of control were weaker than Black Zetsu's, as Obito had broken free. He had been inside Guruguru for about a week now. He was starving and extremely dehydrated. In my old world, he would have died days ago. It was probably only due to the extra vitality that Hashiyama cells granted him that he survived up until now. Even when he was so clearly exhausted, Obito was much faster than me. I could barely keep up with a combination of my Mangekyou, Shanhen, and Fujin. I could have simply run away with Shanhen, but I figured that I would just kill off one of the main threats in the world while he was already weakened. Eyeing and opening, I lunged for Obito, only to pass right through his body. I watched his lone eye spin wildly in its socket. It. Fujin. I teleported out of the way just in time to avoid Obito's punch. Had he not been very much slowed down from his stay within Guruguru, I would have been hit and probably at least incapacitated, if not dead. Tired or not, Obito's punches were hard. I grabbed a handful of flower seeds and threw them on the ground. Juboko. The flowers sprang up, filling the forest floor with an array of colorful plants. I channeled a bit of chakra into my hand, forcing it into the flowers. I watched as the chakra flowed into the flower and began to convert into fire chakra. I made hasty retreat with a shunnen just as the clearing lit up in flames. I would have to retrieve my true minion, Guruguru, later. He probably survived the blast. He was pretty durable if I was remembering correct. Shink and Obito's hand pierced through my stomach. So guys, what do you think about this Naruto story? Tell me your opinion in the comments. And if you want more Naruto what if stories, make sure to subscribe to Universe of Naruto. Thanks for watching.